Good morning and welcome to Abusing Backup Operators with TrustedSec's Titanis. I'm Jim Sykora. I'm a security researcher at SpectreOps. So in this talk, I'm taking a relatively new tool framework from TrustedSec and applying it at relatively old techniques and some as-designed behaviors. I'll demo a couple of the built-in Titanis tools, and then I'll demo a PowerShell module that I built upon Titanis. I'll show a couple of concepts that I'm not seeing much content around, things like modifying scheduled tasks without the API. Recently, I was tasked with adding backup operators to the Bloodhound attack graph. Adding techniques to the attack graph allows both attackers and defenders to be more aware of what's going on in their network. I could have just looked at existing tradecraft and around backup operators, but I'm not one to half-ass anything. So I put my sysadmin hat back on and thought about how backups and restores really work in the Windows ecosystem and realized that there's a lot more to backup operator tradecraft than just dumping SAM remotely. So what is backup operators? Backup operators? It's a built-in group. The local group applies to each individual Windows host, and the domain group applies to all of the domain controllers in the domain. It has default assigned rights on domain controllers in every Windows host. One thing that makes backup operators different than server operators is that backup operators is granted rights on the default admin shares and the remote registry name pipe. That's why server operators can't abuse backup operators' privileges on a DC, but backup operators can. For purposes of Windows access checks, privileges take priority over the discretionary access checks. When you open a handle with the correct flags enabled and these privileges active in the token, it overrides all DACLs for both read and write. This diagram is based on one from James Forshaw's Windows Security Internals. I own 4 copies of it. You should own at least one. Around the time that I was working on backup operators as part of my job, TrustedSec's Titanis was published by Alex Ball, who goes by Code Whisperer 84. I've been exploring the boundaries of what I could do with backup operators using a fork of InfoSec's backup operator toolkit and some janky PowerShell. When Titanis was released, though, I soon realized that this was a better path forward for exploration. So Titanis is a library cross-platform that implements Microsoft Windows protocol support based on code generated from Microsoft's own protocol specifications. This enables support for SMB, RPC, DCOM, LSA, SAM, services, and WMI in ways that most closely mimic Microsoft's intended uses of the protocols. Think of Titanis as being something like the Impacket library, but it sucks less. Titanis is meant to be a platform for people to build upon. I asked Alex if Titanis was named after the extinct bird, but actually it's a reference to On the Shoulders of Giants. Titanis means of giants. Titanis isn't finished yet. Alex has a lot of planned enhancements coming, some of which are very close to being ready. He added remote registry support a little early in a feature branch on my request, and I hear rumors that LDAP support is coming very soon. If you want to use Titanis, there's instructions on how to build it on GitHub. As far as like backup operators tradecraft, getting a little bit more of that, some of the registry tradecraft out there for backup operators is built on techniques from PowerDump, which was written by Kathy Powers, Josh Kelly, and Dave Kennedy. When I was first researching backup operators tradecraft, the most common techniques and tooling I found were variations on dumping the SAM hive of the registry. Backup Operators CPP by Philip Dragovic. It's one of the first things that I saw that uses the reg option backup restore flag to open the keys with backup intent. When you combine dumping SAM registry hives and the security keys with secret dumps or mimikats, this allows you to extract the NT hashes from SAM, all the cache domain credentials, machine account passwords and hashes, application credentials, service account credentials, and local EFS and DPAPI keys. It's important to remember that membership in the domain local backup operators group grants rights and privileges on all domain controllers in the domain. I'm repeating that because it's important. So Backup Operators Toolkit, which I was originally using, adds to that standard dump functionality by adding the ability to create a service that starts after a reboot, enabling DSRM mode, and doing some image file execution options. When I was doing my research, I added some modifications to that tool to test my ideas out, but Titanis ended up being something more interesting. So all these demos that I'm going to be showing are recorded because I'm not going to rely on my internet or the hotel's internet or the demo gods. So this is coming from my lab environment in my home. They're all going to be done on an AD forest called corp1.lab.homelabs.lol, which is a domain that I bought. We've got 2 servers, a domain controller, and a member server called corp1 web01. All the servers are Server 2022, and the workstation is Windows 10. We've got 2 user accounts, a local and a domain. The local account, the PSXL backup operator, is a standard domain user, but it's been added as a member of backup operators group on the web server. The PSXD backup op is a domain user and a member of the backup operators group on the domain. On all my test servers, there's 2 child folders under C:\test. One has access granted only to administrator and system. The other only grants access to administrator and denies access to all of our test accounts. There are files in each of those folders. So like Titanis isn't really intended to just be the tools that are included with it. The tools are examples of things you can do and a good starting point. So there's a bunch of different tools that Alex built into Titanis. Here's some of the categories about them. They're all .NET console applications that function cross-platform, so you can run them on Linux as well. They all support a really consistent command line structure. They're all SOC 5 proxyable, and they all have really consistent output options as well. So here is using the Titanis SMB2 client. From a backup operator standpoint, I was most interested in this because it has a use backup semantics flag, which uses the file open for backup intent flag in SMB. All the Titanis tools have great help documentation. We're connecting to the web server as the local backup operator using backup semantics. We're listing the contents of a directory that we're not granted access to. In fact, we're denied access to this directory. We're copying a file from the denied folder to our local device, and then we view the contents. After my talk was accepted, I talked with Alex a little bit, mentioned that I would like to be able to use Remote Registry protocol instead of just WMI to access the registry. After a while, Alex added this feature branch with MSRP. This was neat because it allows backup semantics over Remote Registry. I'm running this via DLL, not even using the exe, but we can list, set, save, get key info, get the sys key, and we can dump SAM. But like I said before, Titanis isn't just a tool, it's a protocol library that's meant to be built upon. In this next bit, I'm using a fork of Titanis that I made some minor modifications to suit my specific needs, and that's perfectly fine. That's what it's meant to be done. So with everything that's in Titanis, I wanted to go a little bit further and build upon that. So today I'm introducing Titanis Backup Operator because I'm not good at coming up with creative names for things. So everything that the TBO module does, whether it's through a PS drive or a UNC path, is happening live on the remote system over an SMB connection, whether that's an SMB share or the WinReg named pipe. It's all happening with SeBackupPrivilege and SeRestoreActive in the access token and backup intent on the share connection. And again, I recorded these demos because I'm not going to tempt the demo gods. So here we're importing the PowerShell module. We're setting some connection options. This is connecting plain text to a domain controller as PSX backup op. We're creating a new PowerShell drive called TBO. It's pointing to the cadmin share on the DC01. We're navigating it just like a file system because it is. It's just remote and has complete DACL override. This is all remote access over SMB. Here we're still in the denied access folder, which we don't have any access to because we're denied, except for when we're using backup privilege. We can create a file, we can create a folder, we can remove a file, we can copy a file from the remote server to our local host and from local back to remote. And we can check the DACL of the denied access folder. We can also set security descriptors as well. We can't create snapshots with TBO or Titanis, but if they already exist, we can find them. We can browse them. We can copy files from them. We can do things like find alternate data streams. We can look at NIC information. I mean, here we just copied an NTDS.dit file off a domain controller. We can error out the connection and then force disconnect it to refresh. And we can watch a folder for activity. This is kind of fun because this is looking for changes over the SMB protocol on the remote domain controller. And we're looking at a specific folder on that share. And if something changes on that share, it's going to be output into the PowerShell prompt that you have, which you can then script off of for activity. But wait, there's more. Remember, Titanis recently added that remote registry protocol support in the feature branch. So here we have a PowerShell provider for remote registry. Again, this is using the same connection options. We can create a PowerShell drive. We can browse the registry like it was a file system, and we can retrieve information from keys and values. And remember, this is all live remote access on a domain controller. We can add registry keys and values. We can set values, remove keys. If you're familiar with PowerShell, these are very similar to the PS drives that are native to PowerShell. And includes much similar functionality for that. I added some utility commandlets for this. Sharphound, for example, has a way to enumerate remote sessions from the registry, doing the same thing here. We can look at network interfaces, IP addresses, all that information. We can pull Windows services out of the remote registry. Here, this is taking a while because we're pulling 600 plus services off of domain controller remotely. We can also get like detailed information about those services, like what their trigger info is, if they have any failure actions, if there's any like extra parameters around them, or like special DLLs that they load. We can view the security descriptors on those services, which are stored as like a reg binary value in the registry. We can read that security descriptor, we can parse it, we can modify it, and we can write it back to the registry. We can also look for weak services, which is something that Titanis's tools do as well. When you combine the capability to read the registry and the SMB provider, read and write. We can enumerate scheduled tasks. We can view their triggers and actions, read their security descriptors, determine the principle that the task runs under to see if it's an interesting one. This is not using the task schedule API. This is direct access to the server over SMB. It's all named pipes in SMB. And then with that ability to arbitrarily read and write the entire registry, we can recover credentials stored there as well without dumping the registry files to disk or executing a process on the remote host. We can construct the sys key and LSA key. We can use those to recover the machine account credential, the PAPI system keys, and plain text passwords of any service accounts. We can use this information to recover hashes from SAM, which in this case is the DSRM password because this is the domain controller. And well, we looped back to dumping SAM again. Thank you for coming to my presentation. I'd just like to mention that since I recorded some of these demos and submitted my slides, added a lot more functionality to TBO. I made the repo public. I've added more functionality for the PAPI, added some local caching that persists beyond connections to different servers in a SQLite database so that anytime TBO grabs credentials out of the registry or out of SMB, it's caching those locally in the SQLite database, along with like a little bit of an operator log. So any changes you make on a remote host are stored and cached in that local SQLite database as well, if you configure it to do so. All that information in that cache can be exported to JSON and thrown into Nemesis, or you can export it to Bloodhound Open Graph and see where shared credentials are showing up in the Bloodhound attack graph. I also added some local backup privilege support, similar to what Dieter Stevens did with ReactOS back in 2015, which thanks Jeff McJunkin for letting me know that somebody did that a long time ago. And with that, time for some questions. As far as defending, keep these backup operator groups empty. Chances are your backup software doesn't need them anymore, especially if you're using one with agents. You can use group policy to remove the default backup privilege and SeRestorePrivilege from backup operators, server operators, and even administrators. Administrators, of course, can give themselves access back to any privilege, but not necessarily very easy to do remotely. The logging for this is honestly pretty terrible. If you don't have advanced auditing and SACLs enabled, you're probably not going to see this. I'm not saying that an EDR won't see it because you're still opening a handle to sensitive registry keys and stuff like that, but you need to collect the logs, enable advanced auditing on these systems, and actually monitor them. And also, with all that stuff I was talking about earlier, there'll be a Ken backup edge coming to Bloodhound pretty soon as well. The question was, like, I said that it bypasses the DACLs, and he's wondering if it does that with the remote registry provider as well. Yes, so we're bypassing the DACLs, whether we're doing it SMB, remote registry, local NTFS, or local registry. And we're doing that because we have those privileges in our access token, and we're specifically using flags in the protocol specs that enable those privileges, so that, like, when that chart was up there, that privilege is bypassing all the discretionary checks. Yes, so the question was, I mentioned modifying existing services. Can I create services as well? Yes, I added functionality for that. And that's in the release as well. That's something that was done in Backup Operator Toolkit. So something to know about modifying or creating a service is that those changes don't take effect until the service manager reloads, which is usually at reboot. If you're not interacting directly with the service manager API, it's not going to immediately load those changes. But the next time the computer reboots, those changes will be live. Same thing with scheduled tasks. Well, hey, thanks for coming. Appreciate it. And y'all have a great day. Enjoy the rest of the show.